I can't say the service was up to scratch. It smacked of the conveyor belt. In fact, I wrote to the crematorium. I said I thought the hallmark of a ceremony of that nature was reverence, whereas the word that kept coming into my mind was brisk. Moreover, I added, grief-stricken people do not expect to emerge from the chapel of rest to find grown men skulking in the rhododendrons with tub ends in their mouths. If the hearse drivers must smoke, then facilities should be provided. I'd heard good reports of this crematorium, but I hoped that they would agree with me that on this occasion it had let itself down. Of course, if I'd happened to be heartbroken, I'd have felt much worse. I didn't let on to the crematorium because I thought it might get them off the hook, but I actually didn't know her all that well. I used to see her getting on the 37 and we'd pass the time of day. She lost her mother round about the time I lost mine. She had a niece in Australia, and I have the one cousin in Canada. Then she went in for gas-fired central heating just a few weeks before I did, so one way or another we'd covered a lot of the same ground. I'd spent years thinking she was called Hammersley, which was way off the mark, because her name turns out to be Pringle. There was a picture of her in the Evening Post. She'd been a big voluntary worker, with details of the funeral on the Wednesday afternoon, which is the one time I'm dangling my feet a bit. So I thought I'd get out my little maroon coat and put in an appearance. At least it's an outing. And I was glad I'd gone, but as I say, the ceremony was a bit lackluster and topped off by these young fellas smoking. So I thought the least I could do was write. Anyway, I had a charming letter back from the director of operations, a Mr. Widdop. He said he was most grateful that I'd drawn this matter to his attention, and while he was aware the practice sometimes went on, if he personally caught anybody smoking, he'd jump on the culprits with both feet. He knew I would appreciate that discipline within the chapel precincts presented special problems, because it wasn't always convenient to tear a strip off somebody when there were grief-stricken people knocking about. What he personally preferred to do was to keep a low profile, then come down on the offenders like a ton of bricks once the coast was clear. With regard to my remarks about facilities, they had no plans to provide a smoking area in the Chapel of Rest in the foreseeable future, as I must understand that space was at a premium, and top of their list of priorities at the present moment was the provision of a temporary temple for the use of racial minorities. However, he would bear my remarks in mind, and if I were to come across any similar infringements in the future, I was not to hesitate to get in touch. I wrote him a little letter back, thanking him for his prompt and courteous reply, saying that though I hoped not to be making any further visits to the crematorium in the near future, joke, I took his point. I also dropped a line to the relatives, care of the undertakers, saying I was an acquaintance of Miss Pringle, had been present at the ceremony, and had taken the liberty of entering into a correspondence with the crematorium over the unfortunate lapse. I enclosed a copy of Mr. Widdop's reply, but they didn't write back. Which I can understand, because the one thing that death always entails is a mass of correspondence. When Mother died, I had 53 letters. Besides, they may not have even seen them smoking. They were probably blinded with grief. See, we've got a new couple moved in opposite. Don't look very promising. The kiddie looks filthy. Card from the opticians this morning. saying that their records indicate that it's 2 years since they supplied me with spectacles, and that by now they would almost certainly be in need of verification, and suggesting I call at my earliest convenience. I thought that was nice, so I took my trusty platignum and dashed off an answer forthwith. I said I thought it was very considerate of them to have kept me in mind, and while I was quite satisfied with my spectacles at the present moment, I was grateful to them for drawing the matter to my attention, and in the event of my noticing any deterioration, I would in due course get in touch with them. Stood me in good stead as that pen. Mother bought it for me the last time she was able to get over to Harrogate. It's been a real friend. Angie, her name is. I heard him shout of her as I went by en route for the post office. He was laid out underneath his car wanting a spanner, and she came out, kiddy in one hand, transistor in another. Thin little thing, bruise on its arm. I thought, well, you've got a car, you've got a transistor. It's about time you invested in some curtains. She can't be more than 20, and by the look of her, she's expecting another. I passed the place where there was the broken step. I wrote to the council, was a danger to the public. Little ramp there now. Access for the disabled. Whenever I pass, I think, well, that's thanks to you, Irene. My little monument, that ramp. Only some dog had gone and done its business right in the middle of it. I'm sure there's more of that than there used to be. Had a little away day to London last year, and it was dog dirt everywhere. I spotted some on the pavement right outside Buckingham Palace. I wrote to the Queen about it. Had a charming letter back from a lady-in-waiting saying that Her Majesty appreciated my interest and that my letter had been passed on to the appropriate authority. The upshot eventually is I get a long letter from the Chief Cleansing Officer of Westminster City Council, apologising profusely and enclosing a rundown of their highways and maintenance budget. That's been my experience generally. People are only too grateful to have these things pointed out. The keynote is participation. Of course, I wrote back to thank him. Then blow me if I didn't get another letter back thanking me for mine. So I wrote back saying I hadn't been expecting another letter, and there was no need to have written again, and was this an appropriate use of public resources? They didn't even bother to reply. Typical. Just waiting for the paper coming. Not that there's much in it. The correspondence I initiated on the length of the Archbishop of Canterbury's hair seems to have gone off the boil. Till I wrote up to live letters, nobody had actually spotted it. Various people took up the cudgels until there was an impassioned letter from the Rural Dean of Halifax, who has a beard, and that seems to have put the tin hat on it. It's getting dark. The couple opposite just having their tea. No cloth on. They must have put the kiddie to bed. When I put the milk bottle out, I heard it crying. Prison. They have it easy. Television, table tennis, art. It's just a holiday camp. Do you wonder there's crime? And people say, well, what can you do? Well, you can get onto your MP for a start. I do regularly. Got an answer to one letter only this morning. I'd written drawing his attention to a hitherto unnoticed factor in the rise in crime. Namely, the number of policemen these days who wear glasses. What chance would they have against a determined assailant? He noted my comments and promised to make them known in the proper quarter. He's Labour, but it's always very good notepaper and beautifully typed. After I'd dusted round and done my jobs, Had to walk on to the end and bought a little packet of pork sausage and some Basildon Bond. Big black hair in the sausage. So I wrote off to the makers enclosing the hair, stuck it under a bit of sellotape, little arrow, "This is the hair." I emphasised I didn't want a substitute packet, because it was clearly manufactured under unhygienic conditions. So would they kindly send me a refund of the purchase price and the cost of postage? I don't want inundating with sausage. Keep wondering about the kiddie opposite. I haven't seen it for a week or two. And they're out all the time. Every single night they go off, and the kiddie doesn't go, and nobody comes in to sit. It can't be more than 5. Where did they get the money to go out? That's what I'd like to know, because he's not working. Spends all day tinkering with that car. There ought to be a bit less of the car and a bit more of the kiddie. Never plays out, and they want fresh air, do kiddies. It's a well-known fact. You don't hear it crying now, nothing. I've never seen a cloth on. Teapot stuck there. Milk bottle. It'll surprise me if they're married. He has a tattoo anyway. My mother knew everybody in this street. She could reel off the occupants of every single house. Everybody could once upon a time. Now they come and they go. That's why these tragedies happen. Nobody watching. If they knew they were being watched, they might behave. I talked to next doors about it, only there hasn't been any contact since that business over the dustbins, and this other side's Asians, so they won't know what's normal and what isn't. Though I've a feeling he's been educated and their kiddies are always beautifully turned out. Just wish they'd do something about their privet. Thought I'd go and have a word with the doctor, drop a hint there somehow. There used to be just one doctor. Now they've all amalgamated, so it's a bit of a lucky dip. Young fellow. I said I was getting upset like I did before. Before what? He said. I said, it's in my notes. So he read them, and then he said, you've been getting a bit upset like you did before. I'll give you something to take. So I told him about the kiddie. He said, well, these tablets will help you take a more balanced view. I gave them 3 or 4 days, but they didn't seem to me to make much difference, so I went along again. Different doctor this time, same rigmarole. I said I didn't want any more tablets. I just wanted the name of the firm manufacturing the ones I'd already had, because I think they ought to be told if their product isn't doing the trick. The doctor said it would be easier to give me some new tablets, and anyway, I couldn't write. The firm was Swiss. I said, what difference does that make? Everybody speaks English now. He said, we don't want to get into that, do we? And writes me another prescription. I shan't bother with it. In fact, I put it down the toilet. I don't know who you write to about doctors. After I'd had my tea, I sat in the front room in the dark, watching the house. He's messing about with that car. One of those little vests they have now, without sleeves. No kiddie still. I don't even know their name. Thinking about it afterwards, I realised it must have been the doctor that alerted the vicar. Came round anyway. Not the old vicar, I'd have known him. This was a young fellow in a collar and tie, could have been anybody. I didn't take the chain off. I said, how do I know you're the vicar? Have you any identification? He shoved a little cross round the door. I said, what's this? He said, it's a cross. I said, a cross doesn't mean anything. Youths wear crosses now. Hooligans, they wear crosses in their ears. He said, not like this. This is a real cross. A working cross. It's the tool of my trade. I still felt a bit dubious. Then I saw he had cycle clips on, so I let him in. Chats for a bit, this and that. Long time before he got round to God. They keep him up their sleeve for as long as they can, vicars. They know it puts people off. Went through a long rigmarole about love, how love comes in different forms. Loving friends, loving the countryside, loving music. People would be surprised to learn, he said, and I thought, here we go. People would be surprised to learn that they loved God all the time and just didn't know it. I cut him short. I said, if you've come round here to talk about God, you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm an atheist. He was a bit stumped, I could see. They don't expect you to be an atheist when you're a miss. Because they think if you're a single person, they're on a good wicket. He said, well, Miss Ruddock, I shall call again. I shall look upon you as a challenge. He'd not been gone long when there's another knock. This time it's a policeman with a woman policeman in tow. Ask if they can come in and have a word. I said, what for? He said, you know what for. I said, I don't, but I let them in. Takes his helmet off, only young, and says he'd come straight to the point. Was it me who'd been writing these letters? I said, what letters? I don't write letters. He said, letters. I said, everybody writes letters. I bet you write letters. He said, not like you, love. I said, don't love me. You better give me your name and number. I intend to write to your superintendent. Turns out it's to do with the couple opposite. I said, well, why are you asking me? He said, we're asking you because who was it wrote to the chemist saying his wife was a prostitute? We're asking you because who was it gave the lollipop man a nervous breakdown? I said, well, he was interfering with those kiddies. He said, the court bound you over to keep the peace. This is a serious matter. I said, it is a serious matter. I can't keep the peace when there's cruelty and neglect going on under my nose. I shouldn't keep the peace when there's a child suffering. It's not my duty to keep the peace then, is it? So then Madam takes over, the understanding approach. She said, didn't I realise and appreciate that this was a caring young couple? I said, if they're a caring young couple, why did you never see the kiddie? If they're a caring young couple, why did they go gadding off every night, leaving the kiddie alone in the house? She said because the kiddie wasn't alone in the house. The kiddie wasn't in the house. The kiddie was in hospital in Bradford, and that's where they were going every night. And that's where the kiddie died on Friday. I said, what of neglect? She said, no, leukemia. He said, you better get your hat and coat on. I've got 2 social workers come. One white, one black. Maureen, I'm supposed to call the white one. Shocking fingernails, ginger hair, and last week a hole in her tights as big as a 50p piece. She looks more in need of social work than I am. Puts it all down to men. We all know about men, don't we, Irene? I never said she could call me Irene. I don't want to be called Irene. I want to be called Miss Ruddock. I'm not Irene. I haven't been Irene since Mother died. But they all call me Irene. Her, the police, everybody. They think they're being nice, but it's just a nice way of being nasty. The other one's Asian. Mrs. Rabindi. Little red spot on her forehead, all that. Sits, talks. She's right enough. She said I'd be useful in India. You can earn a living writing letters there, apparently. They're all illiterate. Something daubed on her door last week. She says it's what you get to expect if you're Asian. I said, well, there's all sorts gets chucked over my wall. We sit and talk. Oh, she's a bit of a boring woman. I tell her I love my mother, and she tells me how she loved her mother, and I tell her I'm frightened to walk the streets. She tells me how she's been attacked herself. Well, it doesn't get you any further. It's all me too. Social work. I think it's just chiming in. I'm on what's called a suspended sentence. It means you have to toe the line. If I write any more letters, I get sent to prison. The magistrate said I was more to be pitied than anything else. I said, excuse me, may I interject? He said, no, your best plan is to keep mum. Big fella, navy blue suit, poppy in his buttonhole. He looked a bit of a drinker. Maureen says I should listen to local radio. Listen to these phone-in things. Join them. Chat with the disc jockey and choose a record. She says they're very effective in alleviating loneliness and a sense of being isolated in the community. I said yes, and they're even more effective in bumping up the phone bill. Maureen's trying to get me on reading. I suppose to get me off writing. She says books would widen my horizon. Fetches me novels. Only they don't ring true. I mean, when somebody in a novel says something like, I've never been in an air crash, then you know this means that 5 minutes later they will be. Say trains never crash, and one does, in stories saying it brings it on. So that when you get the heroine saying, I don't suppose I'll ever be happy, then you can bank on it that there's happiness just round the corner. That's the rule in novels. Whereas in life, if you say you're never going to be happy, then you never are happy, and saying it doesn't make a heap of a difference. I sometimes catch myself thinking it'll be better the second time round. But this is it. This has been my go. New policeman now. Walks the streets the way they used to. Part of the new policy. Community policing. Smiles. Passes the time of day. Keeping an eye on things. Certainly keeps an eye on number 56. In there an hour at a stretch. Timed it the other day. And when eventually he comes out, she's at the door in one of those little shorty housecoat things. He's in there now. He wants reporting. I ought to be writing up my diary. Mrs. Proctor's got us all on keeping diaries by way of literary appreciation. The other girls can't think what to put in theirs. Me, I can't think what to leave out. Trouble is, I never get time to write it up. I'm 3 days behind as it is. I'm that busy. In the morning, it's occupation, and I've opted for bookbinding and dressmaking. In dressmaking, Mrs. Dunlop's chucked me in the deep end, and I'm running up a little cocktail dress. I said, I never have cocktails. She said, well, now you've got the dress, you can. That's what it's geared to, this place. New horizons. It's in Shantung with a little shawl collar. Lucille's making me a chunky necklace for it in handicrafts. I share a room with Bridget, who's from Glasgow. She's been a prostitute on and off and did away with her kiddie accidentally when she was drunk and upset. Funny little face, you'd never think it. Her mother was blind but made beautiful pastry and brought up a family of 9 in 3 rooms. You don't know you're born, I think. I'm friends with practically everyone, though, besides Bridget. I'm up and down this corridor. More often than not, I'm still on my rounds when the bell goes. They laugh at me, I know, but it's all in good part. Lucille says, "You're funny, you, Irene. You don't mind being in prison." I said, "Prison?" I said, "Lucille, this is the first taste of freedom I've had in years." Of course, I'm lucky. The others miss the sex. Men, men, men. They talk about nothing else. Mind you, that's not quite the closed book it used to be. Bridget's taken me through the procedure step by step. And whereas previous to this, if I'd ever found myself in bed with a man, I should have been like a fish out of water. As Bridget says, now at least I know the rudiments. Mind you, at my age, I can't ever see it coming to that. Still, it's nice to have another string to your bow. They've got me on smoking now and again as well. I mean, I shan't ever be a full-time smoker. I'm not that type. And I don't want to be, but it means if I'm ever in a social situation where I'm required to smoke, like when they're toasting the Queen, then I shan't be put off my stroke. You see, that's the whole philosophy of this place. Acquiring skills. I sailed through the secretarial course. Miss Macaulay says I'm their first grade 1. I can type like the wind. Miss Macaulay said we mustn't let the grass grow under our feet. And she says if she goes down on her knees in admin, then they might, repeat, might, let me have a go on the word processor. Then the plan is, stage 1, I go on day release for a bit, followed by stage 2, a spell in a resettlement hostel where I'm reintegrated into the community, and then finally stage 3, a little job in an office somewhere. I said to Miss Macaulay, would it matter my having been in prison? She said, Irene, matter. With your qualifications, it wouldn't matter if you'd been in the SS. But the stuff some of them come out with, you have to smile. They have words for things I never knew there were words for. And I square myself on occasion now, though only when the need arises. The other evening, I'm sat with Shirley during association. Shirley's very obese. I think it's glandular. And we're trying to put together this letter for her boyfriend. Well, she says it's her boyfriend, but I had to start the letter 3 times, because first go off she says his name's Kenneth, then she says it's Mark, and finally she settles on Stephen. She stammers to Shirley, and I think she just wanted a name she could say. I don't think she's got a boyfriend at all. I think she just wanted to be in the swim. She shouldn't actually be in here, in fact. She's not all there. But apparently there's nowhere else to put her. She sets fire to things. Anyway, we're sitting there in her room, trying to concoct this letter to her pretend boyfriend, and in waltzes Black Geraldine, drapes herself across the bed, starts chipping in, saying, was the boyfriend blonde? Did he have curly hair? They're nasty personal type questions she should know better than to ask Shirley, and Shirley's getting confused and stammering, and Geraldine's laughing. So finally I threw caution to the winds and I told Geraldine to piss up. Geraldine screams with laughing, goes running down the corridor saying, do you know what Irene said? Do you know what Irene said? And when she'd gone, Shirley said, you shouldn't have said that. I said, I know, but sometimes it's necessary. She said, no, Irene, I don't mean you shouldn't have said it. Only you got it wrong. It's not piss up. I said, well, what is it? She said, it's piss off. She's good-hearted. Sometimes Bridget will wake up in the middle of the night shouting, dreaming about the kiddie she killed. And I go over and sit by the bed and hold her hand till she's gone off again. There's my little clock ticking. And I can hear the wind in the poplar trees by the playing fields. And maybe it's raining. And I'm sitting there. And I'm so happy.